Hi, I'm Emma Miller, and welcome to Art This Week Bio's Conduit Gallery. This is part one in a series of interviews we did on the history of Nancy Whitenack and Conduit Gallery. In this first episode, we speak with Nancy about her origins with Conduit's first space at 2814 Elm Street in Deep Ellum. Now for our interview with Nancy.
First thing that we're curious about is what were you up to before Conduit? How was art involved in your life and just personally, and then art career? How did that look?
I was a teacher in Dallas with DISD and taught in Dallas for 13 years. The last 6 years of that experience, I was a teacher with the TAG development, the talented and gifted. I was one of 7 people who were chosen to start that program. And by the end of 6 years of that, I was really fried and ready to do something entirely different from teaching. So I left teaching and started working with a couple of private dealers and decided that I would strike out on my own. And the first thought was that I would be an artist representative and help those artists get into galleries and so forth. Quickly, I realized that galleries do not want to have to deal with a representative. And so I started developing a space in Deep Ellum so that I could show artists' work. I was married at the time, and my husband and I moved into a warehouse in Deep Ellum and started developing a showroom or a gallery space, an exhibition space, and also developed a living space on the mezzanine of that same building. And I opened a show. I spent a lot of time in front of the heater upstairs trying to decide what the space really was and what to call it, and realized very quickly after I did this first exhibition that it was a gallery. So I had to figure out how to run a gallery.
So why Deep Ellum?
Deep Ellum was really the hot spot in the 80s. That's where all the activity was. There were certainly galleries that were happening in Uptown, like Mattingly Baker, but I was much more interested in the rawness of Deep Ellum. It was a much more affordable. We could rent a building in Deep Ellum quite inexpensively. It afforded a lot of space. So that's where I chose to start. When we moved to Deep Ellum, living was not part of what you could do. It was zoned not for residential at all. And so we had to be very secretive about developing the space. So we would cover the windows and work, hoping no one would come and knock on our door. Some of the greatest memories I have of that time, preparing the living and exhibition space, was pulling all of the electrical wire through the big cable, through the big conduit, if you will. You have to use this yellow goop and put it on the wires and pull it through the big cables in order to make everything safe. I think what probably led a lot of us to the neighborhood was the fact that there were lots of artist studios, which had been there for a number of years, and a very lively artist community. One studio space in particular on Elm Street housed 5 or 6 artist studios, including Gene Anderson, Mark and Polly Lavatelli, Roberto Munguia. Those were really great early days. We had the most fabulous Halloween parties. And the guys from the studio would go out and drag in these giant trees and would build this huge bonfire that they would start in the afternoon. It was kind of behind the building, and you could see the flames. I mean, they were popping in the sky. But because it was this old warehouse district that nobody paid any attention to, the cops never came and closed us down. So we'd have these great parties. By the end of the night, people were jumping over the bonfire, and it was pretty rowdy and great fun.
Can I get you to talk a little bit about the people and the characters, and maybe a few that had influence on you and this kind of journey?
Certainly. Barb and Jordan, who were our neighbors, were really important to me. They were a real sustaining factor because they were down there trying to make something happen as I was. So they were very close friends and somebody I leaned on to help solve problems as things came up. At the same time, Robert Barsamian and his wife, Catherine Snedeker, moved to Deep Ellum and had a studio down the street on Elm. And they were really good friends and people that we relied on and got together with. DVAC was going at that time. Maybe it was called D-Art. Patricia Meadows was the founder of D-Art, and she was a real mentor for me and somebody that I looked to as a support system. I'd say another mentor for me in those very early days was Edith Baker. She was a dealer that I could really count on to answer questions because I had many questions. I was trying to figure out how to run a gallery space, and she was very generous and gracious in giving me pointers and advice.
So on that note, I'd like to ask about early successes. Are there any that really spring to mind that told you, I'm on the right track, let's keep going?
It took 2 years to get Janet Kuttner to review one of my shows. I felt like I had finally made it when I got a review from Janet Kuttner. It also took 2 years to become a DADA member, a Dallas Art Dealer Association member. They had a very strict rule, even though I was invited to the very first meeting they ever did when they were forming the association. Then they very quickly made a rule that you could not become a member unless you had been in business 2 years. So I met those people and then I was dismissed for 2 years. So I had to sort of hang in there and try to gain speed and do a lot of flag waving and try to put on some interesting shows before I was recognized as being a gallery of worth.
Any shows in particular? You mentioned putting on some interesting shows. Any shows that spring to mind as most interesting?
Absolutely, a number of things. I guess the very first year, in 1984, one of the most memorable shows was the work of Victoria Rivers, who was a California artist who worked in neon. And that was a very exciting time. I enjoyed working with her and figuring out how to plug in a lot of neon and make it work. We did a really fun plate show, I guess, in 1985. Gene Anderson had a clay studio down the street, and he would make these big plates and get them they were greenware. He'd make the plates, and then we invited artists from the community to come in and paint the plates. And then we did this terrific exhibition of the plates after Gene fired them. And it was really kind of a who's who of everyone in the art scene in Dallas. So we probably had 40 artists who were involved in the plate show. Those are some early shows that I was excited about. Everything was sort of, oh, well, let's try this and see if it works. So there were a lot of failures. You know, it was interesting to me, the first exhibition that we did was March the 17th, 1984, which was St. Patrick's Day. And I just had this really small mailing list, which I sent out to the people I kind of knew, and I asked friends for mailing lists. But we ended up with this really huge group of people for the opening. I had no idea where they came from. So that was a real success. But then beyond that, you know, you had to figure out how to sustain that and keep people interested in coming. We did that fairly well. What I was interested in doing was showing artists who lived in the area, who were underrepresented, and who needed attention, and work that I felt merited that attention. So my goal was to show Dallas area artists, Texas artists, and really promote the work.
We want to thank Nancy for speaking with us. You can find more information on the gallery at conduitgallery.com. Watch for other episodes about Conduit Gallery over the next few weeks. Also, look for a link below in the show notes for the full interview. That's it for Art This Week Bios. Thanks for watching.
I still got your Polaroid.